Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the I Will Teach You a Language podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you're just finding the podcast for the first time, then welcome. This is a place where we talk all about language learning. I share my experiences and tips and advice from having learnt many languages myself so that you can learn that little bit faster and hopefully become fluent in the language that you're learning, or languages that you're learning even, sooner than you might otherwise be able to. Now today we've got something very, very special. If you have spent any amount of time, or even gone to any language bookshops around the world, you will have seen courses by a certain Michel Thomas. Now, he's well known now as the person, the creator of these courses. But in fact, his past and his story before he became famous for producing these language courses is even more incredible. And many people, I've discovered, are not necessarily aware of Michel Thomas, the man, and his past. But one of the things he was most known for, in fact, was his extraordinary secrecy and reluctance to discuss his method. He had world-famous clients of the likes of Woody Allen, Emma Thompson. They would come to his language studio in Los Angeles and he would teach them French over the course of a weekend and charge them huge amounts of money to do so. He had a method that was extremely effective and had many students to testify to that. But because of this extraordinary secrecy around his method, nobody knew exactly how he did it, which is what makes today's interview so special. I'm speaking to Sue Hart, who was the commissioning editor at Teach Yourself Languages back in the late 90s. And what she did was persuade Michel Thomas to actually create his language courses for the public for the very first time. People have been trying for years. Some of the top language scholars in the world have been trying for years to get Michel Thomas to talk about this unsuccessfully. But Sue was successful. She managed to persuade him to record these courses, and that is why we have today in the world all of these wonderful and, I think it's fair to say, well-loved courses from Michel so that we can use his method to learn lots of different languages ourselves. I'm going to stop there. I don't want to spoil any of the wonderful stories that Sue talks about in this conversation. We cover many things from how she persuaded Michel Thomas to actually come on board and record these courses, some stories about the man himself and the incredible 2-year process that it took to actually persuade him and sign the contract and begin recording. We're going to talk about how the sessions themselves were recorded and the advert that was put out in the Daily Telegraph looking for students to volunteer to come and be taught by Michel. Imagine that happening. So this conversation takes place in the Teach Yourself offices in central London. We are in a very nice little room where we're recording the conversation. It is a busy office, and so there are people walking around. The sound quality is not always ideal, but I'm sure you won't mind in the slightest because it's such a wonderful conversation. So without any further ado, I present my conversation with Sue Hart. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's a great pleasure to be here and talking to you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
There's so many different areas that I'd like to discuss with you, but maybe we can just start off by talking about you and how you first became aware of Michel Thomas and his work.
It all started with finding a video with an accompanying memo in a filing cabinet. I had recently been appointed commissioning editor for Teach Yourself Languages, and I had a new office, and I was going through the filing cabinet, masses of files, as you can imagine, with 50-odd languages on the list, and I came across a file that just said Michel Thomas, and inside was a video and a memo. And the memo was from a colleague in another part of the company, and they had sent the video down saying, we thought we might be working with this man doing his biography, but I don't think we are. But he's a languages guru. You might be interested in him yourself. So I took the video home, and it was the BBC Horizon programme, The Language Master. And
so this was late 90s?
Yes, it would have been. And I watched it and was absolutely bowled over by it, really, especially the section which showed Michel teaching. So I went back into the company, into my store director, very enthused, and she said, "Okay, see what you can do."
So for those listening who aren't familiar with this is a short BBC documentary. They actually go into a classroom and they film him teaching a group of students. And the interesting thing about that was that, according to the documentary, that was the first time that his teaching had ever been seen in public.
Indeed.
Which we'll explore later. So had you heard of Michel Thomas before that? Were you aware of him?
I'd never heard of him. And I had no idea how big he was, really, what a character he was, until I actually met him.
Right.
Well, so I took the video home, came back very excited, and I wrote to him, to his New York offices, just a short letter. I sent a copy of the Teach Yourself catalogue because I thought he would be suitably impressed with the number of books that we published and that we were a serious languages publisher. And a week later, I had a phone call from him. You can imagine I was quite surprised just to be sitting at my desk and just, it's Michel Thomas here. And we had a shortish conversation, and then we agreed that the next time he was in London, we would meet. And so that's how it all began.
So he called you himself?
Yes.
Okay. Now this is very interesting, and I think I'd like to explore this because it's somewhat at odds with the stories that are told about him and his teaching, because he's famously very secretive about his work.
Indeed.
I'd like to ask you why you felt that he thought it was the right time to actually reach out and speak to you, because I imagine he must have had many approaches before. But before we get to that, let's just backtrack and talk about the nature of him and his teaching.
Yes.
Because he famously he had a language institute in Los Angeles, I believe.
Yes.
And he would teach there himself, and he developed tapes himself actually, but he wouldn't let those tapes leave the building.
No.
Talk to us about your understanding of that.
He was very, very, not secretive, but suspicious and worried that somebody was going to copy his method. So he didn't allow his tapes out of the building. Either he taught students face-to-face himself at great expense. I think his courses were something like $18,000 for 3 days. But he also developed courses which were cassette recordings of him teaching a student, and those were used in his premises, and they were used by students who couldn't afford or didn't want to have a one-to-one with him. They would come in and they would listen to the tapes, but at the end of the day they were locked away in a cupboard. And even when we were quite advanced in negotiations with him, I was not allowed to have them. I couldn't share them with my publishing committee because he was just totally protective of them.
So this was while, I guess, winding the clock forward now, when you were actually developing out the courses, still you were not allowed to access to those tapes. Okay.
And I never had anything in writing, looking back. You said you were surprised that he phoned, but he wouldn't have written. We had no letters from him, ever. And again, I think this is his wartime experiences, perhaps. Don't put anything in writing. Don't commit yourself to anything until you absolutely have to.
In his language institute, did he have teachers that he trained up himself, or did he do all of the face-to-face teaching himself?
He either did face-to-face or they did his courses, and then he had teachers that he brought in that he would give them a short training to, but they were usually teachers who were teaching locally, who came in and did some vocabulary practice, but he taught the core lessons either personally or through his tapes.
Through the tapes. Okay, so he did obviously create the tapes because he wanted to reach a wider audience than he could if he was just doing those one-to-one classes. I mean, do you think did he have ambitions? What were the nature of his ambitions in terms of reaching?
Well, he really wanted to change the way languages were taught. He was convinced that his method was the only method that worked. He was dismissive of any other method. And he wanted his languages to be taught, but he didn't want to release control of them. It was a strange dichotomy, really.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's a funny way of going about it, changing the world of language teaching.
He had many approaches throughout his career, and he did lots of pilots, all very successful. But I think when it came to dealing with the powers that be in large institutes, he got very angry, very irritated when they questioned his method, when they wanted to fit his method into their timetable. He had a clear idea of how his method should work, and I think he felt actually that he was the only one who could deliver it.
So you think that was at the root of his insecurities with that? It's the fact that the method he didn't trust that method could be interpreted and taken off and adapted in different
He said
ways.
that it could. He said that anybody could use his method. Maybe it was the method itself that he didn't want to share. Right.
There's a story about him being invited to UCLA to speak to the language department there about his method, and he famously refused to actually talk about the method. He would give a demonstration,
yes,
but he wouldn't talk about the methodology.
That's right.
And it's again, it's very difficult to know what to make of that.
He was a very complex character.
So what changed then from, in your mind, from the Michel Thomas of that period to the Michel Thomas of, and you have to tell us what year this is, when that phone call arrived?
Yes, I think he was finally beginning to accept the fact that he was mortal. And
what year are we talking? Is this early 2000s?
Yes, before then.
Okay, late 90s.
Late 90s. Because it took 2 years actually to negotiate with him, to bring him to the point when he signed a contract with us and we were able to start recording. Now, I think he was aware of his mortality. I think there was a great deal of excitement after the BBC programme, The Language Master, and I think that had all died down, and I think he was possibly, I don't know, feeling a bit flat and realising that he was getting on. He was in his mid-80s, and that it could all die with him.
I mean, potentially also, do you think he had a taste of what this attention, media attention, could bring? I mean, the positive side of that.
I think he did. Yes, and he did certainly like his celebrity status. He did enjoy. Oh, he did. Yes, he did. He would occasionally name drop, and he had got a very good list of names that he could drop from.
We've all been guilty of that.
Yeah. Well, no. So he did enjoy that, and I think I came along at the right time. I think the timing was right. I think I'd worked with Teach Yourself Languages and Teach Yourself General books for many years, and I'd dealt with a very wide range of authors, and I sensed immediately that he was going to need very careful handling. And I think the fact that I was older, the fact that I was a woman, he liked women, definitely, and we hit it off, I suppose.
One of the questions I did mention to people that I'd be talking to you about this, and one of the most common question that came back is, how did she persuade Michel to actually record and create these language courses? I'm sensing that it wasn't necessarily a case of persuasion. It sounds like he was already almost sold on the idea.
Yes, he was open to the idea. I don't think he was sold on the idea. And from the word go, I realised that negotiations would be tough and need to be of a pretty high level. So I involved the MD and other senior members of staff. And between us, we, I suppose, allayed the fears that he had. And after about 2 years, he began to trust us.
So talk us through those 2 years then. Was it dinners at the Ritz? Was it transatlantic flights? What was the process?
He came over to the UK 2 or 3 times a year, I would think. always travelled first class, always stayed in very good hotels. And he came in. I can remember one particular meeting when we were not quite presenting it, but talking to the other directors about the Michel Thomas programme and the potential we thought it might have. And it was very difficult because he had these rather uninspiring tapes that he played, and they were very old, and he was a very old man, and we had nothing written down. We had no course outlines. So really it was a great leap of faith, I think, on our part. We had no idea how they would sell, how they would go down, even if we'd record them, because he could have just backed out at any time.
Right. So, did you meet with him often? Was it
maybe 2 or 3 times, maybe half a dozen times a year for a couple of years. We had phone conversations. When he came over, I and my MD would take him out for dinner, or I'd go and have dinner with him at his hotel.
So what was the nature of what took 2 years, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, he didn't respond to letters. He didn't write letters. It was all face-to-face, and I think that really took time, and he wouldn't be rushed. We knew it was going to take time, although he was in his mid to late 80s, and we felt that we didn't know how much time there was. He would not be rushed. Right.
So it does. You're painting a wonderful picture of how people, I guess, have to take these things on faith and have a feeling that something great can be created.
Yes.
And to have it's a testament to you and the publishing house that you did see that through, and you did see the potential from that. The second most popular question that came back was, were you prepared for the success that the courses had? Did you expect the degree of success that they had?
We saw the potential. We knew there was huge potential, and we knew that the market was eager for them, because we knew that there was a huge number of people had seen the Language Master and really wanted more. I think he said he had something like 10,000 letters after that programme, or letters or contacts after that programme went out. So we knew there was potential there.
It's interesting that all this activity has been in the UK rather than in the US.
Well, I think he had his New York office, and I think a lot of the interest was directed to his New York office. And I don't know how much he responded to. He had one office manager there, so he didn't have a huge staff of people to deal with all these inquiries. So I suspect a lot of them just went unanswered.
Do you think there's a little bit of a tangent, but do you think either now or at that time there was a greater interest in language learning in the UK than in the US?
I think there is, yes. Well, we've got the facility to travel, haven't we, far more than the Americans.
Yeah. So you eventually did the deal. You agreed to produce the courses. Mm-hmm. What happened next?
Well, we had to recruit the students. We decided that we needed a man and a woman, and we needed an American voice and a British voice. So those were the bare bones of what we knew we needed. We didn't know how long the courses were going to last, because we had no outline, we had no material.
Didn't know about the methodology.
We had no idea. It was really sailing into the unknown. But we had a very good studio manager who'd done all the recordings for the Teach Yourself Languages, so we worked very closely with him. And there was a lot of publicity. I think it must still have been on the back of the Language Master, but the Daily Telegraph ran an article about Michel Thomas, and we just put a byline saying, anyone interested in taking part in the recordings, please contact the publishers. And we were inundated. Yeah, so we knew that there was demand there. But we were still unable to gauge how well they would sell. We knew there was demand, and there was a buzz going around really by the time they were published, but we didn't know how well they would sell. And I don't think that they would have sold in the numbers they did if it hadn't been for the fact that the methodology worked. I think that's what it came back to. I think people were very attracted to the idea of, I remember the bullet points we had, no pens, no homework, no memorising. It seemed almost too good to be true.
I mean, those are three of the kind of, I guess, the unique elements of his method, isn't it? No writing, no reading, I guess, as well. No homework and no memorising.
He absolutely forbade memorising. His whole premise was that if you try to learn, you become tense, you become stressed, and stress is the greatest barrier to learning.
Let's dig a little bit deeper into the methodology, because it's people listening to this are language learners, and they have this interest in language. I mean, the methodology is striking, isn't it? I mean, for me personally, I can't imagine learning without reading and writing. I simply can't, and it's a common question that I found is, does the methodology actually work? Going into it, did you have any strong feelings about the methodology either way? Were there discussions about the adaptations? Did you have these discussions about, are we really not going to have any reading and writing?
No, not really, because we knew we had to accept what he was offering. There was no room for negotiation, so we had to go with it. And I know it worked, because I remember after the first day of recording, we recorded the first ones over 2 days. It was just straight, one day, and the next day. 8 hours, or maybe 6 hours. He just went through. And I remember at the end of the first day, I thought, oh, those students, they've learned so much. It's going to be awful tomorrow. They'll come back to the studio and they won't be able to remember anything. Next day in the studio, it was still all there.
They remembered everything from the day before.
He would give them a 5-minute, 2 or 3 minute quick revision. It couldn't be revision, but just to re-establish their confidence, really.
And the basis of this, from as I understand, is essentially understanding. So he says it's important that you understand.
He used to say, what you understand, you know. And what you know, you don't forget. So this was why it was very important for the students in the studio to think as much time as you wanted for thinking, because if you were thinking it through, it was going into your long-term memory.
Yes.
So I think the promise on the sleeve of the recordings might have been almost that you could learn it in your sleep, or there was no effort involved.
Yeah, I mean, it does play very nicely into what people would like language learning to be, doesn't it? We would all like it to be, to be no homework and no memorising and learning in our sleep. So it's easy to see, I mean, from a marketing perspective as well, just how well that works with the mass market. Which, I mean, do you think that has had any role in the popularity?
Not recently. I think it did in the immediate popularity, but I think now it's established. And so it's almost self-perpetuating.
So the recordings themselves, what was it like to watch him in action doing the recordings?
It was amazing, absolutely amazing. And I think this is my biggest regret, that we didn't film the teaching, because it was wonderful just to see. Although not much was happening in so much as it was very quiet and very calm, there was a great atmosphere, a great intensity, a great energy, because the students were concentrating. Michel was concentrating. He made it look so easy. He was teasing out the language, really, from the students. But he had no notes. He went into the recording studios with no notes. He apparently taught each course differently every time, because he always managed to tailor it to suit the students he was teaching.
So he's reacting and responding to
and at times he would go off at tangents, and we would think, I'd sit next door to my colleague, man, what's he doing now? Where's he going with this? But then 10 minutes later, he would have brought it back to exactly where he wanted to be.
It's quite something, isn't it, going to do a recording like this with no notes?
No notes.
I mean, do you think he prepared?
No.
No.
I think he prepared for the Italian, because Italian was his the weakest of the 4 languages, I think. Not the weakest, but I think he prepared for
his
that.
own, in his own language?
Yes. But even then he had 1 or 2 little scraps of paper that he would surreptitiously look at. He didn't have a script or a master plan. Well, he did have a master plan, but it was in his head.
Yeah, and I suppose that, being so proficient at French and Spanish and so on, Italian to a certain degree has a lot
in common.
I guess the methodology, whatever it was,
yes,
would have been much the same.
Similar, yeah.
I'm trying to visualise the recording itself, and I remember him saying something along the lines of, the importance of being relaxed and having a very, comfortable environment, much like we're in now, a little table with some nice flowers and so on and so forth. But did the recording equipment and the sound engineers and all that not interfere with the process at all?
Not at all, because they were wearing lapel mics, and I think that was one of the rare occasions they were used at the recording studios, because we were used to language recordings being very formal with a script and each actor having their own mic. This was very informal. And as I say, they just went on and we just let the recording play. In fact, Michel, even though he was, late 80s, he never wanted to stop. In fact, we told the students that we gave them a signal to give us. They had to put their hands behind their head and lean back as if they were getting a bit tired. And then we would say, "Oh, sorry, Michel, we've got to stop. We've got to change the tape," or something, which was completely unnecessary. But we had to give him a reason to stop. Otherwise, he would just have gone on.
The course itself, the first course, was recorded over 2 days. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you? All of them were recorded over 2 days.
Yeah.
Did you? Afterwards, did you sit and discuss and talk about it, or was it?
I can remember. I can remember the first break. We recorded the French one first. Our recording manager came into the booth where we were sitting, the kind of control box, and he said, "Well, he was just amazed. He'd sat through so many language recordings, and he was just blown away by it." He said, "I can't believe this. I think even I could learn a language." So there was an immediate excitement. I think we felt that we were at the start of something really important, something really new.
How happy was Michel with the recordings themselves and the courses?
He was always happy. He was always confident. His courses were the best. He never thought they could ever be improved. Well, they were improved because he'd spent 26 years refining them. No, he was happy.
Were there any doubts at all? I mean, you get the impression from watching him and listening to what he says that he has absolute confidence in the truth, if you like, of what he's doing. Do you think he had any doubts, or was there anything revealed in your conversations with him that led you to think actually maybe he's not quite so sure about this?
No, he had no doubts, and he inspired confidence in those around him. One of his claims is that one of the things he said, your learning is my responsibility. If you don't understand something, it's my problem. I haven't taught you properly. So the students were relaxed and he was relaxed, and it was like being with somebody who gave you a feeling of security and safety, somebody who absolutely knew what they were doing.
Did you ever speak about because one of the implications of this, what we're talking about, is that the teacher is very, very involved in the process.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder myself to what extent that is then scalable as a methodology, because if with so much involvement from the teacher and such long stretches as well I don't know if all of his teaching was done in such intense conditions, but I don't know if you ever had any discussions about how such a methodology could be scaled. I mean, if you were to roll this out across schools and universities around the world, and how would it work?
We did, in fact, have discussions, and we did, in fact, develop some schools courses.
Really?
Yes, and they were very, very effective. And
were they implemented?
Yes, there's one or two schools still using them, and we are working on re-releasing them. But that was very impressive. That was quite a good story, really. A guy phoned. We were getting phone calls all the time from people saying, "Oh, this is wonderful," etc., etc. And I had a phone call one day, and this guy said, I'm a teacher. I've been using Michel Thomas. I've been using it in my classroom, which of course really wasn't quite legal because he should have asked us first. Yeah. But he said, "Can I show you what I've developed?" And he came, met us, and he developed a course, a Michel Thomas-based course that he could use in his 40-minute classes with his students as a language teacher.
I see. And so that was you then took that and did you develop it? Or
Yes, we had courses. We've got Michel Thomas for Schools courses. But so they are in the process of being redeveloped at the moment. But that was very exciting to see whole classes being taught the Michel Thomas method.
Yeah, well, I mean, it still is a very exciting process. Maybe that's a watch this space.
Watch this space. Yes, it is indeed.
We were chatting briefly earlier about how Michel Thomas actually learnt his languages, and no one seems to be quite sure.
No, and I never really had that conversation with him, which is rather strange. Yeah. I read that he claimed to speak 10 languages, and I can account for 7. I was counting up. English, of course, now. Polish, he was born Polish. German, he lived in Germany. French, lived in France, yes. Spanish, I don't know where he got Spanish from, and yet he was very, very fluent in Spanish. He taught Hispanic classes to teach English in the 60s. So that's Spanish. Yiddish, probably, because he was Jewish.
These are all languages you heard him speak?
Italian, yeah. But then there's 3 more. I don't know about those.
It's funny, isn't it? Because with one of the questions that polyglots are always asked is, well, how did you learn your languages? You would think it was the kind of question that he'd be asked a lot. I'm not sure, did he give many media interviews?
No, he didn't. But there again, he was very available and amenable. If there was, he went on breakfast TV one morning, I remember. But that meant getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and he was already in his late 80s. But he was game for it. So he liked that kind of. He did like that kind of media attention.
In many ways, it follows that someone who has learned so many languages would then go on to teach them. But of course, I mean, one of the things I've become very aware of is that there's many people out there in the world who do speak many languages, but see it as more of a kind of lifestyle and don't actually work in it professionally. Have you any inkling of what inspired him to actually dedicate his life to teaching languages? Because he's a man of many talents.
Yes.
And it only takes a kind of brief reading of all his wartime activities to understand just how capable and talented he was. Do you know what it was about languages that got him so fired up?
I remember him telling me that he was very inspired. He studied psychology at the Sorbonne when he was in his 20s, late 20s, I think. And one of his lecturers said no one really understands how the brain works. And that stuck with him. And then I think his wartime experiences when he withstood torture from the Gestapo, he lived in slave labour camps, his experiences with the French resistance, he realised the power of the mind. He was able to blot out pain and...
of course, he lost his whole family in
his family, yeah. So I think he was intrigued by the power of the brain, and he wanted to explore it. And he said that he chose languages because he thought language learning was one of the most alien processes that the brain would undertake. So he started exploring how languages could be taught.
That's very interesting. He said that language learning was one of the most alien processes.
Yes, he did.
Did that? Do you remember how he reacted to that? Because it's an odd phrase.
Yes, it is. But those are the words he used, and I didn't react. Mind you would never interrupt him when he was talking. But And I thought that was rather strange. I should have taken him up on that. But I think he developed his method and he found it was very successful. And then I think celebrities started coming and he started becoming famous. And I think he did enjoy the lifestyle it gave him and the celebrity status he himself acquired.
Well, he's got quite a list of celebrities on his resume.
It's amazing.
He lived in LA, of course.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess I think one last thing I'd like to ask you, really, which is if there's anything that you never asked him that you wish you had, or if you could wind the clock back, is there anything? Are there anything that you would have liked to ask him, or any part of him or his story that maybe you felt unsatisfied with, or?
I suppose I might have asked him. You couldn't ask him personal questions, really. He didn't do small talk. He was happy to talk about the celebrities he'd taught. He'd tell you anecdotes about what had happened. I think probably with Michel, you were more of a listener.
It's just the way it was.
It's the way it was.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we all found. And actually, you had to be very careful because if you upset him, he was very unforgiving. Once someone upset him or offended him, that was it.
Doors closed.
Doors closed, yes. So you had to progress very slowly.
Well, I think that's a very fitting way to describe him, really, someone who you listen to, because obviously there's so many thousands, I suppose millions of people around the world who enjoy and who learn from listening to him.
Yeah.
And it's one of the great stories of language learning and language material, what he's produced. So I guess we're all very fortunate that you did actually do all this work, and we now have all these tapes and these materials here. So I'm sure many people listening would like to, thank you for actually doing that and doing that service to the language community. Well,
it was a great privilege to have been part of it.
Wonderful. Well, it's great to hear that there's a lot more on the way, and the book is still being written, as it were. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, and it's a wonderful story to have been told.
No, it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Sue Hart. It was an absolute pleasure to meet her and to have this conversation. I really feel like it was a privilege having a window into all the events that that led up to the creation of these courses. So I'm very, very happy. If you'd like to continue the conversation about what you've heard here today and about Michel Thomas in general, then there's a number of ways you can do that. First of all, you can navigate to the blog post that accompanies this recording, where I've summarized everything, really the best bits from the whole interview, along with some quotes that I took from what Sue was talking about. And you can find that by going to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/Michel, MICHEL. So iwillteachyoualanguage.com/Michel. There you're going to find lots of extracts and notes, like I mentioned. You're also going to find a photo of myself and Sue at the Teach Yourself offices in London. You can also leave a question there. If there's anything you'd like to know or ask, I'll see if I can persuade Sue to come back and perhaps answer a couple of questions there, or maybe I can do that on her behalf. But anyway, if you'd like to leave a comment or express your appreciation to Sue or ask a question or otherwise, then you can do that at the same link. Similarly, if you have any friends who have used Michel Thomas courses before, or anyone who's learning a language in general and you think they would benefit from or enjoy this interview, then please do feel free to share that with them, either on social media or by sending a link in an email, anything like that. Again, you can find the link to this and everything I've mentioned at iwillteachyoualanguage.com/Michel. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time. Thanks for listening to today's episode, and in case you didn't already know, I teach languages in a rather unusual way through stories. Now, stories are a great way to learn a new language because when you're engrossed in a story, you remember things more easily, and the mechanics of the language just start clicking inside your brain. It's quite something, and if you'd like to find out how you can learn a new language or improve your skills in a language that you already know and do it with the power of stories, then you should check out my free Story Learning Kit, which will teach you exactly how this method works and how you can use it yourself to learn a new language. Visit storylearning.com/podkit, that's PODKIT, to get free access. Inside you'll find explanatory videos, masterclasses, worksheets, short stories to practice with, and much, much more. Once again, that is storylearning.com/podkit, PODKIT, and if you're lucky, you might also find a link in the podcast description or show notes of this episode.